Welcome to Mental Stillness. My name is Derek, and I'm excited that somehow you stumbled across this podcast. One of my goals when starting this podcast was to bring mental health conversations into leadership circles. For this episode, I had the opportunity to sit down with Maggie Olson. Such a great leader, a very interesting background and person. She's the CEO and founder of Nova Chief of Staff, the premier and first of its kind destination for Chief of Staff education, certification, and development. She spent 20 years in some of the largest companies in retail, food and beverage, and technology sectors. Maggie's career is marked by a consistent ability to step into new roles and newly created roles in different industries and really transform teams and businesses from the ground up. She spent time as a buyer for Nordstrom and then was recruited into T-Mobile's highly competitive executive development program. And that put her on a path where she actually became the chief of staff to the president of the T-Mobile business group. Again, a very consistent theme of every guest I bring on here is that there's a genuine care for the people on their team. And so Maggie has a lot of great insights and things that we all can learn from. So here's my conversation with Maggie Olson.
Well, thank you for having me. Super happy to be here. I am the founder and CEO of Nova Chief of Staff, and we do Chief of Staff development, education, coaching, recruiting, consulting, really all things Chief of Staff. I found myself in the Chief of Staff role 4 or 5 years ago, after working for Nordstrom and then at T-Mobile, I moved into the chief of staff role, and I'd never heard about it before, but I was privileged enough to land the role and build out a team within my chief of staff work, and really fell in love with the job and ended up creating a company to support chiefs of staff because there really aren't a ton of resources out there for chiefs of staff. So that's where Nova Chief of Staff came from. I am in Lincoln, Nebraska. I've been here for a couple years, but my 35 years before Lincoln was in Seattle, Washington. So I'm a Seattle person through and through. And I went to the University of Washington Foster School of Business for my MBA. I played volleyball in college, lifelong leader. I was sixth grade class president, I recently remembered, and my friends were kind of poking at me, what was your charter? And oh my gosh, it's fun to think back on like 12, 13-year-old little leader and how that shows up now. So I'm excited to get into all the things with you.
I need to admit, I've been rewatching Designated Survivor. And so anytime I hear chief of staff right now, it's like I'm thinking Kiefer Sutherland, his chief of staffs. And so excited to hear how the non-political version of chief of staffs are, but I'm sure there's overlap too. You said your introduction into that, and you kind of, I don't want to say you stumbled into it, but it was when you were at T-Mobile. You said, you got kind of put into that position. Was that something that was that a new position for T-Mobile and your all's kind of structure? And so you were the first of its kind in that organization?
Yeah, for that leader, I was really his first true chief of staff. The chief of staff role in a lot of places is pretty new, so it's not uncommon to be the first chief of staff, which is kind of fun because inherently chiefs of staff love to build systems and processes and tools.
And there's
really
no comparison, right? It's like...
Yeah, you're out there figuring it out. Your leader usually doesn't know what a chief of staff does, so you're creating the role and helping educate. So I went back to school, got my MBA at the University of Washington while I was a buyer at Nordstrom. So I was, going to school at night, working during the day, traveling on buying trips. It was a lot. I ended up getting recruited to a executive development program at T-Mobile that only was interested in folks that have had extensive leadership leading big teams. So in an MBA program, it's, often filled with a lot of engineers. There's less folks who have led large teams, but I was identified by the T-Mobile recruiters as somebody that could fit into this executive development program. And after 6 months and interviewing with half of the executive team, Myself and 4 others across the country were chosen for this program. And I was moved from Seattle to Salt Lake City, Utah for about 9 months to lead a district of stores, about 100 people in a place I'd never been, in an industry I've never worked in. And I had to prove success. My district had to improve. My team had to follow me. I had to report and present on my business consistently. And from there, I moved, thankfully did a good job, kept the role, kept going. And then I ended up moving from that role to my next rotation, which was retail strategy at T-Mobile. And from there, I learned a lot of really excellent things, met some mentors and such that finally introduced me to the chief of staff role. So I moved from that executive development program then into the chief of staff role for one of the leaders who I'd met during the interview process in that executive development program. It's a high trust, high relational role. It's often that you kind of have to have a little bit of networking and relationship building with the person who's going to hire you prior to them thinking about hiring you as a chief of staff.
When you stepped into that and you realized kind of what it was, what did the chief of staff role provide differently for you than other leadership positions?
Thinking about the chief of staff role, when I, first kind of settled into it, I immediately realized that it was kind of the combination of all the things I loved about my past roles. I have always loved stepping into new businesses, learning quickly how they run, identifying the key players, and then really optimizing, like figuring out process improvements and templates and culture with the team, and making changes to improve the business really quickly. So that has always been part of all the roles I've been in. But then it's and you're also a buyer, or and you're running around a sales floor, or whatever it might be. And I just love that the chief of staff role, you truly learn right from a business leader at the top of an organization, and you're constantly trying to elevate and improve their back office functions. And there's so many ways you can do that. It's a role that you can really lean into your strengths and make it what you want to make it, based on what you want to do and how you want to help the business.
I was looking at something you posted recently on like the 15 signs that you are a chief of staff on LinkedIn, and reading through that, that's a lot for one role. I'm looking at that, I'm like, that is, how does someone step into that while also have any semblance of balance? It's like, how do you not have to always be on?
Yeah, you kind of are always on, but the really cool thing about the role is it's a leadership position, in the sense that you are, and maybe we need to touch kind of on the definition of chief of staff, and
Yeah,
then we
that'd
can
be
dive
great.
into what it is. But I define the chief of staff as a business leader's right hand and strategic thought partner, focused on executing, organizing, and prioritizing the leader's business initiatives and driving transparency and alignment across the leadership team. The chief of staff exists to maximize the leader's time, exponentially increase their impact, and really solve problems and remove roadblocks along the way. So, when we kind of dive into what really are those things and what's the real purpose of the role, it's definitely to allow leaders to stay in the vision, growth, strategy, leadership space, versus heads down chasing, executing follow-up items, and really being like too deep into the business. So leaders have long known that they need administrative support. Okay, of course we need help with our calendar and our schedule and expense and travel and whatnot. But folks are figuring it out. The chief of staff role is on the rise for a reason. And that's because leaders also need strategic, high-level executionary support of their most important initiatives. So executive assistant and chief of staff are very different roles, but they're in the same environment. They're working on, similar projects. They're both in the leader's back office, but EA, while they can act strategically, while they can reach and fill gaps and take on special projects, it's a more tactical role. And the chief of staff role is a higher level, more strategic role that should never, and rarely does, hold those key functions of admin work, being scheduling, inbox, travel, etc.
That's a great kind of distinction, especially for those that aren't as familiar with the difference and the nuance there. And why do you think, like, why is it important for someone to properly identify, am I a chief of staff? Like, I would imagine that clarity would be important.
It's so important. And there's a few reasons. The chief of staff title is not in practice everywhere, but chief of staff work is happening in a lot of places where the title does not live. So we've got one, I think our most popular blog on Nova's website, novachiefofstaff.com, is about the many different titles of a chief of staff. So chief of staff work can exist under titles like business operations manager and business planning manager and special assistant to the X and, transformation leader or strategic partner. I mean, there's dozens of titles that chief of staff work happens under. Um, and sometimes you are doing chief of staff work, but you don't know that you're actually doing chief of staff work. You don't know you're a chief of staff. And when that's the case, you don't know what resources are available to you. It's hard to figure out a roadmap for the role. It's hard to figure out if you're doing a good job or not. So identifying that you're doing chief of staff work is really helpful for your own success, but it's also helpful to identify others doing chief of staff work under different titles so that you can see potential career paths because not all companies use the chief of staff title. Chiefs of staff exist across all levels of a company, not just in the C-suite. They exist across all industries and company sizes, for-profit, nonprofit, small business, big business, entertainment, media, food and beverage. Like they're everywhere. And you can also step into any of those places and you may not find a chief of staff. They may not know about it, or they may not use one, or they use one under a different title. So that awareness and education piece makes it a little bit tricky. And the title chief of staff, I think probably the last stat that I saw, about 70% of chiefs of staff don't have direct reports. So the whole title of chief of staff, like, what does that really mean? And it's hard to understand, but by title alone. So it does take a little bit of explaining to do.
Mhm. And one of the things, with Nova that, I guess the one of the visions behind that is a certification part because it is so there's lack of education, lack of understanding, there's nuance, it's different organization to organization. So am I right in my assumption of Nova is kind of like a standardization piece and a certification? Tell me a little bit more about why you started that after experiencing that role.
Yeah. So I loved the role. I entered into the first chief of staff role for the president of the B2B organization and fell in love with it. And I also had the privilege of hiring 7 or 8 people to be on my chief of staff team and really operationalized and created all the roles and the processes and the templates and the tools and everything for all of our roles over that almost nearly 2 years. And I'm a builder. So it was built, we're good to go. You kind of put yourself out of a job eventually if you're that style of chief of staff because your team is covering it. We're good. Processes are in place. We're good to go. And I was ready also to start doing fractional chief of staff consulting. I've had an entrepreneurial bug since finishing my MBA, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to go figure out how to do some consulting work. And I still do that today, and I love consulting. But during this time of leaving the corporate role, I was talking to my mom and I mentioned to her how wild it is that there's thousands of project management certifications out there and nothing for chiefs of staff. No place you could go get hands-on practice doing the things chiefs of staff do every day to build confidence and competence and have a roadmap and resources to set yourself up for success. So she said, well, why don't you build it? And that's where we are now. So I built the course over about a year. I was pregnant at the time and partnered with New Mexico State University to launch the course on their platform. It's now on our own platform. And yeah, it's been really well received in the market because there hasn't historically been many resources for chiefs of staff and none that are, online self-paced hands-on practice doing things chiefs of staff do every day, like writing briefs and building presentations and presenting and executive project management and throwing a complex offsite or having an all hands meeting and ghostwriting for your leader. Like the list goes on. We throw our students through a dozen or maybe 2 dozen scenarios where they're doing what a chief of staff does every day.
And the kind of talking to some people who might be interested in exploring some of this, I guess the delivery side of the certification is virtual and possibly some things in person. Is that right?
Yeah. So we have two tracks at this point. So depending on if you're an online learner or if you're more of an in-person learner, Nova Chief of Staff, we just facilitated and led 60 students through an in-person environment of our course. So we adapted the format to in-person. We added group work and team brainstorm sessions and lecture and solo sessions. And we had a 3.5-day in-person certification course in let's see, late October. So we've got three more in-person trainings scheduled for next year. I think it's May, September, and November. And you can learn more on our website. But we launched with our online course. It's really our flagship product. Over 600 students at this point enrolled, and both are great options. It just depends on what kind of learner you are.
Mm. Well, having that variety and option based on meeting people where they're at.
Yeah.
So really exciting, to kind of hear, and I can tell you're passionate about it. And so,
Yep.
with which to do anything while you're pregnant, to start a company, you'd have to have some passion to see that through.
Oh yeah, that was a little tough, but we made it.
You made it. Yep. Yeah. So all the birthdays now are 2 birthdays, right? Nova and your kiddo.
Yes.
Kind of following the same timeline there. But
Yeah.
I would love, and this is as we've discussed, a lot of our audiences is leaders who are also mindful of trying to create environments as leaders to set people up well based on where their mental well-being is, and just that workplace environment. We've all probably been in those to where that wasn't prioritized, and so we've got a lot of listeners who, I'm not trying to be a therapist, I'm not trying to do this or that, but there's some things I can do and how I go about leading just to set people up well. We spend so much time at work. Why can't I as a leader, you as a leader, do some things to really just set people up for success and meet people where they're at. And so that's one of the things that drew me to this conversation too. So really, just from your standpoint, what are some strategies for integrating mental health awareness into leadership practices, just to support your team and support your people? So I don't know where that lands with you, but just curious where you come at that answer from.
Yeah, it's a good question, and there's so many ways we could take this conversation. But as I'm, thinking about chief of staffing in a Fortune 40 company and kind of the conversations that happen at the highest level in those staff meetings, it needs to happen in those staff meetings. There needs to be a agenda item, whether it's weekly or monthly, that we touch on culture. We go around the room and ask, how are people feeling? And how is your team? What's coming up? And listening, of course, is just so vital. And there's so many different tactics and tools to listen to your people, whether it's conversation or surveys or, insights from leaders. Like, it's just critical that it's happening, and that we take that soft side data and blend it with the hard side data, and we look at how things are going. And we, just like we do with the business, we think about how do we improve. And as a chief of staff, like, what are those strategic recommendations that you make to improve the culture? And what do you bubble up to your leader? At what level? At what level of detail? Like, it's just an important conversation that we should always be having. To get even more granular, like as a chief of staff, or as a back office, like a C-suite leader or a business leader or somebody that supports the back office of one of these leaders, what is your communication strategy with your employees? Like, your internal communication strategy. I've worked with and for several leaders, and everybody has a different approach. Maybe there's a current event happening, like the election, which we recently just went through, and you have conditioned your team to expect to hear from you on tough days, no matter what side of the table you're on. They expect to get a note from you that's heartfelt and thoughtful and lets you know that that you're thinking of them. I've worked with leaders that are so good. I mean, I'm getting goosebumps at their internal communications, and it just connects your people to you. in really incredible ways. And I've worked with leaders who just don't think about it as naturally. Oh, I should probably send a note to my team about the hurricane that's hitting half our employee base, or maybe it's smaller scale and they don't think about it, but they should. So where does a chief of staff or where does your support team come in to help facilitate these conversations or draft the internal comms and step in to fill gaps where maybe the leader isn't quite as strong? The last thing I'll say here is really the reflection on the different types of leaders and their approachability. I've worked for two companies that I speak really, really highly of, both of them, Nordstrom and T-Mobile. They both care a lot about their employees and a lot about their customers and the decisions they make and how they present themselves as the leadership team. Really, it reinforces what they're doing and what they're saying. And as an employee and working closely with the leadership team, like I can confidently say that we've got some really good humans leading those companies. And you can see the difference between an approachable leader and a less approachable leader. And in the case that I'm thinking of, there's leaders that constantly remind their teams that their door is always open. And they're always telling their teams that because they know that the further up the chain they get, the less connected to their people they will be. So they have to work really, really hard from a communication perspective to make sure their teams know that, they are reachable and their door is open, even when they're back to back all day long. Like their team doesn't hear that. They hear that their door is open. And it has a profound impact on the culture for sure.
Having a leader that says my door's open and them following through on that verbal goes a long way for people.
Yeah.
I was talking to a leader in the hospitality industry last week, and it was like, my top level leader says, "Hey, I'm here. Let me know when you need something." He said, "But the last 4 times I've gone, there's been a very quick reason as to why they couldn't help me with that thing." Right. And so it conditions people. And so even just as a pause for leaders, like when we say the thing, like the follow through on the thing is probably more important, or the thing we're saying is going to lose credibility. And so it can sound like 101, but just a good reminder to try to be mindful of that. And so it sounds like with the chief of staff role, also helping keep things top of mind, just another set of eyes on maybe picking up on some of those, some of those needs of the team is an important part of your, part of that role too.
Yeah, it's a crucial pillar of the chief of staff role, which is to really be connected to, and be the eyes and ears of team
To
culture.
read the room.
Yep, to read the room and bubble it up and suggest improvements, just like any other part of the business. But staying connected to the culture is key as a chief of staff for sure.
So I would imagine one of the key skills for a chief of staff is to be ready to lean into hard conversations, be able to, your own communication has got to be top notch. And so I don't know, tell me a little bit about some of the ingredients or qualities of someone would be a successful chief of staff, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, what you're talking about now is just kind of making me think about the influential leadership aspect. As I mentioned, chiefs of staff are often individual contributors, but you could be the chief of staff to a CEO, and you may be a director level or a VP level, and you may be really kind of overseeing a lot of folks who might be at a higher level than you on the executive team, and also cross-functionally leading projects and teams across the company and with people at different levels who have completely different goals than you do. So influential leadership is so important. And I don't know how you can be a strong leader without strong communication. There's just no way to do that. So yeah, I think that one of the things I talk to chiefs of staff a lot about is the most important things that you do early to set yourself up for the role, for success in the role. And it's really, really comes down to like EQ things. It's building relationships, approaching curiously, asking a ton of questions, kind of being in that learner mindset instead of the teacher right away. Chiefs of staff are driven, achievement-focused people that want to have a big impact and move fast. Well, that can intimidate people, and we need to know this. So it's more about the trust building and the relationship building and the learning before you ever put a recommendation on the table or make a big change. You've got to have buy-in and collaboration first. And it takes time to build those things. There's no quick solution or like trick to just building trust.
Yeah. Flora, I'm just interested in the chief of staff person as a leader. I've just seen a lot of women who they get labeled as something a man wouldn't in the same role. And so I don't know how we address that, if you want to address that or not, but just, is that something that you all kind of touch on with your people who are getting, I don't know, who are interested in a role like that?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that women are up against a lot when it comes to career success. Historically, there's been, one woman at the table. So not only are women having to kind of charter their own way and carve their own path, but there's also historically been a competition element that only one can win, if one at all. So the history of lifting each other up because all of us can exist in the same table has not been there. So oftentimes the hardest people for women to work with are other women, because we are not used to supporting each other in the ways that we really can and should. So I think it's just even more important as that like driven achiever coming in, working quickly to know yourself, and that, that EQ perspective of how do I come off? How are my suggestions landing? How's my speed? Am I building relationships at a faster pace and building more trust than I am trying to implement change? Like it has to be, we have to, overcompensate in that area of building relationships, building trust, slowing down, understanding our impact. Because even if we could say it's silly, I don't want to worry about how I'm coming off, I think it's not fair that a woman has to worry about that, men don't have to. The reality is we're not going to get anywhere if we aren't focused on that, especially in highly influential roles. So it is what it is, and we kind of have to work through it. But I think the awareness and like the conversation is really important, and kind of knowing where we've come and why maybe historically women haven't supported each other as much is important. It's important to talk about.
I think you said in sixth grade when you were already showing some leadership. And I hear that a lot with leaders, right? There's always like, there's someone typically is modeled, leadership. And then we gravitate towards it. We find ourselves in these positions that like, I don't know, that almost foreshadow this journey of
Yeah.
leadership. Who were some of those early examples for you that really stand out that, I don't know, piqued your interest when it comes to leading?
Oh my gosh, such a good question. Um, early on, and I think this wasn't really conscious, but I feel incredibly privileged to be in the environment that I was in growing up. My grandmother was one of the first female physicians in the country, probably first 100 or few hundred.
Wow.
Her name was Jean. So she credits getting into medical school because they thought she was a man. She was in the breadlines, Depression era, had a hot dog and coffee every day, and that's all she had to get through medical school. She met my grandfather there, two physicians. They had three women, one of them being my mom, three girls, and they've all been incredible leaders. And so it's never been for me growing up anybody telling me, oh, you should go do this or stand up here or take this leadership role. It's just been by example. Like seeing my aunts and my mom raise their hand for things and step up and contribute and not see that they're hesitating. Maybe they are internally, who knows? Would be surprised if they aren't. But just kind of seeing that they are displaying that they deserve to be at the table, and they're in big roles and facilitation and teaching and higher education, and really helping people from a leadership perspective. And that's the example I've had throughout growing up, really. And then in some of my earlier roles from a job perspective, I think I just started really like following the leaders that I loved a lot, the leaders that I felt like, oh my gosh, I want to be just like him, or oh my gosh, she does that so well. And I'm definitely a analytical processor type person. Like, oh, why does she make me feel good in those places of, even if I'm not doing well, like, what is it? Or what is this sports, example of like quick feedback and coaching? I'm getting it all the time. How do we translate that into the business world, which I think sports has a huge influence on how we lead for sure. But yeah, I had some really great role models from a leadership perspective as I got into my career, and the people who are approachable, the people who lead with humor, and a bit of self-deprecation while somehow still like commanding the room and like being so respected.
It's an art
It's
form.
just amazing.
Yeah.
It's an art, absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Well, and yeah, I love what you said around humor and self-deprecation, but then also you can still be confident and have those things, and those are endearing qualities that because we all have those things, right? And to see someone front and center leading with that and be like, oh, they're the CEO and they can make fun of themselves or they can laugh at themselves, like I don't know,
yeah.
the humanization of leadership is so important, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. And the vulnerability, like
Hmm.
of saying, like, I don't do this very well, but I'm still going to coach you on it. Like, I
Yeah.
had a leader that said that. And it's like, ooh, I'm going to use that for the rest of my life. I am
Yeah.
not saying I'm an expert, but we still need to talk about how we can be better here.
Yep.
Like,
And
it's important.
and surround yourself with people like chief of staff roles that compensate and kind of counterbalance some of our more weak areas or areas of growth. I'm kind of interested. So you're in a season now as a CEO. There's so many things now. It's almost like a convergence of a lot, I'm sure, of everything, culminating to a point where now you're the head. You're in the head position, and so now
Mhm.
you've started a company. You now get to determine the culture fully. Culture is determined by leadership, and so when you think about the culture of Nova, what are you trying to champion?
It is interesting because I have been a people leader for 20 plus years and in many, many different environments from sports to food and beverage to sales floors to offices and in person and virtual. Like, there's just a lot of different components that I definitely like pull on now. But what's also interesting about this season of life is this is also my first time being a mom and being an entrepreneur intentionally to be home more. So it's been a tough balance thinking about, okay, so how do I build this life that I want where ideally I'm working maybe 11 to 5 as I'm home in the mornings a little bit with my little guy and of course in the evenings. And how do I also show up for my people? When I was in person in my last corporate role as chief of staff in this T-Mobile role, I was in person, almost every day or at least half time through COVID with my whole team. And the ability to have fun and have team lunches and to do offsites and to like collaborate and just see each other was like tenfold, like to what it is now. I run a virtual team now, and I'm ideally minimizing my meetings, like as much as possible. So we've worked through this kind of plan where we have Tuesdays and Thursdays are our back-to-back, meeting days. At least I'm back-to-back, and then Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I save for flow time, and then flexibility for trips or family or whatever it might be. And so it's been like, to be completely honest, it's been really tough to figure out how do I show up as the leader that I've been trained to be, that I am, that I want to be, from a time perspective with my team. In my past life, I would show up in more time because I had more time. Now it's more about relying on who I am as a leader and trusting that I'm giving my team what they need, rather than extra time or as much time as before. And I have the benefit of working with at least one person who I worked together with before at T-Mobile. So that's helpful because we, know each other really well. And, but, from a tactical perspective, the main strategy that I guess, employ is building a culture of feedback. My team will always know if they are on the wrong side of something or if they need to improve in a really important way. They will always know. So that gives us the ability to have quick, direct communication consistently. Like from sports, right?
Hmm.
I was a setter. I was constantly being told, higher, more to the left, slower, higher, whatever it is, like a million pieces of critique very quickly. And it's not critical. It's just quick, direct feedback because you don't have time to
Yeah,
offer
you
more
need
than
to
that.
make an adjustment.
you got to make an adjustment, and it's okay to do that. It's kind. And so I'd love to think that we've built this culture that feedback is early and often when you're new on the team. We've set a culture of feedback. We give feedback consistently. My team should feel open to giving me feedback, and that I have intrinsically built this trust in myself as a leader that my team is getting what they need from me. And I'm giving them what they need, even if it's a little bit of, I don't want to say a slower ramp up, but like you just have to trust that it's there. Like just like with building relationships, there's no trick to building trust. It's going to build over time. The more consistent and aligned you are, and the better communication. So I think we rely a lot on that communication piece.
Well, and I would imagine it allows you to, if and when it does happen that people aren't getting something that they need, I'm going to hear about it, not have to guess. That's the reality.
That's the expectation I set. Absolutely. Is that you don't hesitate. If you need something, you've got to reach out. And I'm always here. My role is to not hold you up. And I've had leaders who make me feel like I am interrupting them, and it's explained back to me. It just doesn't make sense, right? My team is working on behalf of me. The last thing I want them to do is be gatekept by something I could help with. And so I try to reinforce that, but I do know that as an employee, it's really hard to feel like you're bothering your boss. So we try to, talk about that a lot.
Mm-hmm. I believe within your role with T-Mobile, the pandemic was a key part of that. It's really interesting. And I'm asking this one out of genuine curiosity. As I talk to leaders in all these different industries, it's almost like, where were you during 9/11? What was leading like during COVID? Because it's just fascinating. Yeah. So tell me a little bit about just within your role during that, like what were the challenges? What kind of was going on in your world?
Yeah. So I moved into the chief of staff role in November of 2020. So and I was in Seattle. So we were the first case of COVID, pretty much. I think it was like early January, and then T-Mobile sent everybody home. I think it was like March 7th, a little bit before the rest of the country. And I was on this retail strategy team that was responsible for reimagining new store concepts. We're not going to be reimagining any store concepts for a little while. And I had an incredible leader, Katie Oakland, who was always able to see she probably couldn't see COVID coming, but see what was coming in terms of what our team should be focused on, and position us as like utility players to jump right in. Because we were kind of this like niche team that had a lot of different skill sets, like human design and program management and major, strong, like kind of digital storytelling and a connection to the C-suite. We were heavily like working with a few of the C-suite leaders. So she positioned us as well-suited to take on essentially COVID response for all of our retail stores. And so my role became kind of like program managing the whole thing. So I have not talked about this in a minute, but we had to, of course, close all of our stores. But then when we came in, we had to reimagine, like, what are we going to do with our store population of employees? And what are we going to do with our stores, if anything? So we ended up transitioning the back of our stores into kind of workrooms where our store employees started taking virtual calls and online, like text in calls, to help with customer issues. And so we had to mobilize like new technology and new platforms and like training, and I mean just like standard operating procedures, multiple functions across the company to make this happen, including engineering and operations and like our store teams and all of it, for thousands of employees. I mean, we've got like 100,000 employees, I think, are at T-Mobile, and in the stores, most of them, like nearly all of them. And so I think we did this in, I really can't remember, but thousands of people. We mobilized and did all this, and I was privileged enough to lead the effort, and kind of it was my first major project management of a cross-functional like incident with multiple working teams, and I learned a ton. about it. And then after that, I ended up a few months later moving into this chief of staff role. And I was virtual with the business leader for months before we met in person, figuring out. And honestly, it was kind of nice because I could see his kids and I could see his house. And those are things you didn't, used to get before a virtual world. And then, of course, we had to tackle things like return to office that went on and is still going on for companies, and have a whole bunch of things in there too.
Remote roles that stay remote, or
vaccine mandates. I mean, there was a point where we said you're getting vaccinated or you're not coming back to work. I know a lot of companies did that, and it's tough when you have a really, really geographically dispersed employee
and with
base.
that many people, right? Just the complexity, and I don't know, from a your own growth standpoint, how do you think that I don't know, propelled you into leadership? Obviously, there's some things you had to overcome, and it sounds like you overcame, and there was success there. Like, I don't know, what did that grow in you or teach you about your own leadership?
Yeah, I learned a lot in that kind of program management role of COVID response, that I had to be super collaborative. So instead of me just being able to take the lead or finish the project or like do all the things, like I couldn't do all the things. In fact, I couldn't do hardly any of them. They all required specialists who led different categories of the business in T-Mobile. So I was humbled and had to, I think we really didn't have the opportunity to slow down much, but I think I had to have a bunch of conversations outside of the meeting that I thought I would just be having, and instead be building one-on-one relationships with all the key players outside of the actual meat of the project to make sure that we were in a good place, that they trusted me, that they would go when I said we needed to go, like things like that, and that's what you don't think about, or maybe what you just don't know how to do until you're thrown in it and you learn the hard way.
Well, it sounds like you went back to your role as a setter in volleyball, setting other people
Oh my
up to
gosh.
to do
Yep.
to score the point or to do the thing. So,
Yeah, and there you go. That's chief of staff work too.
yep. Sounds like we have a lot of in common when it comes to creating environments that meet people where they're at, and a lot of times that's you're not expecting people to leave everything at the door when they come in. They're showing up, as their full selves, and obviously it's a stressful week for a lot of people going into elections, and again, kind of whatever side you're on, that's just that can be a lot. And so when you think about leading and think about leading in weeks like this that are potentially anxious for a portion of your team, like tell me a little bit about helping other people navigate their own anxieties, uncertainties, some of the challenges that maybe even go beyond just
Yeah.
your organization.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I recently posted about this on LinkedIn. I think it was the day of the election. And what I was really thinking about is I wanted to have a conversation with someone on my team. I don't think it was too serious, but it was election day. And I knew that it's just not worth it on election day to have deep conversations with people or give feedback or really get into a new project. And so I was reflecting a bit on that. Going into election day and thinking about some of the core, true leadership principles that I think if you're a leader, you've got to be paying attention to like the 10,000-foot view of like what's happening right now. And when it comes down to it, leaders have to take care, we have to take care of our people. And nothing matters more because your people aren't going to be productive. Your business isn't going to be healthy or strong. And if you're like me and like you, like we care about our people, we're kind, we want to have a great environment. We want to, be all in this together and support each other. So, when we think about a week like election week, or especially just election day, like send your team home a couple hours early. Let them get the takeout, let them get to their families' houses, like let them decompress a bit from work. Work is not going to be done well in the last few hours of a big night. It's just not. So like know that and communicate to your team, like go home a couple hours early if you want to, and model that yourself if you need that. And I think a couple other things in a tough day or tough time like this is we as leaders have to be the most steady, the most predictable, the kindest, the most supportive when everything else is so up and down and so unpredictable and inconsistent, and potentially hard for people to navigate. And, we've got to like be mindful to save the tough conversations, save the feedback. Don't assign a brand new project to somebody on a day where they're just trying to get through it. It's just not a good move. It's not going to help your business. It's not going to help you as a leader. And I think the flip side of that is we have to take care of ourselves, and our employees have to take care of themselves, and we have to encourage that. It's just critical. And so for me, it was, okay, what do I need to do on this day? I need a little exercise in the morning. I'm going to vote in person. I'm going to have some extra family time. I'm going to leave an hour or two early because I'm heading to my neighbor's house that night, so I'm not alone at home with my baby. Like some really conscious reflection into what you need in order to just get through it, honestly.
Well, and there's a part of even you saying like, it's not only me, us caring for our people and sending them home early, but it's we also need that, right? It's us modeling and being consistent with following through on that for ourselves. Cause it's also easy to be like, well, I'll stay behind. I'll cover for you so you can go do that. And we kind of, the top level leaders can just not take the kind of care of themselves that they would need.
Yeah.
So just being consistent and accepting that, hey, there's also a time and place for leaders to model self-care as well.
Yep, absolutely. And if we're modeling it, our teams are going to see it.